So now, before you get bored, let's find ourselves some little challenge that we can solve with this button. And that means we will add some functionality to it and actually write a script. So let's go back to the UI builder. Let's zoom out a little bit. And let's say that we want to have some second element just beneath the button. We will call this element the box. We will say it has to be 100 times 100 pixels. It will get some background color so that we can see it, and it will get a border radius of 10 pixels. Okay, beautiful. And now the challenge that we want to solve is that whenever we click that button in the game view, we want this box to kind of randomly resize. So since this is the first time that we're actually touching some more serious, let's call it more serious functionality, I will do that pretty slowly. We will create a new C# script. We will call this button screen, because technically this script will kind of interact with the whole screen that we are having here. And now we are just opening this up. And there is our script. We don't need those two import statements on the top here. We don't need to start in the update method. All we need is the enable method. So as said at the beginning, I have to assume some kind of familiarity with Unity in general. So I hope that you know that this onEnable is one of the lifecycle methods, basically similar to start. And you can use that pretty well for doing some initialization of your UI. Now, one other thing that we need is the actual UI Toolkit library. So we have to do Unity engine.UI elements. And now the first line that you will basically always write when you just have one screen and just one layout is a line that is basically connecting your script to your actual layout, because you need some way to access the stuff that is in our UXML, right? So that is basically what you always do at the beginning in order to then interact with it. And the way we can do this is first we need a reference to our to the UI document that we added on the game on this game object before. I don't know, we can call this UI, it doesn't really matter. And now we use the normal get component method, and we take this component. And on the next line, we want to grab a reference to the root of this UXML file that we are using. And you can do that by going UI root visual element. Now, this is nothing too complicated, and we don't really need to understand what is happening under the hood here. This is just think about this as our connection between the script and the actual UXML. Because now from this root element, we can basically access all the elements that are in our UXML. And the elements that we are going to need in this case are, we said that we have this visual element that was the box, and we will need our button. Let's call this my button. Now, when we want to get a reference to those elements, we just have to check quickly if they are actually having the correct names in UI Builder. The box does have a name, the button does not. So let's call this my button. Save it, and now we can go back into the code editor. And now in order to get references to those elements, we can say box is root.q, And now this Q is a way, it stands for query, how you can search your UXML and find elements. But we will have a chapter on this because you can do pretty complicated queries here. So let's just for now accept that this is kind of our tool to get references to the elements in our layout. And now for the visual element, what we can do is just say box, because this here is the ID. I'm sorry, this here is the ID of the element, and we gave it in UI Builder, we gave it the ID, we gave it the name box. So it says, give me the name of the element, and I will basically find it. And now for the button, we have to do something slightly more complicated, because when we don't provide anything here for this Q, it assumes that you will want a visual element. But for the button, we don't want a visual element. What we want is a button. So we have to explicitly provide the type here, and the rest is just the same. Now we just give it the name, and that way it will find our button. And now for the really interesting part, how do we actually provide some functionality to the button? When we choose the button and we just look at this IntelliSense here, what are kind of the properties and methods on the button, you will find one that is called, can we get there quicker? That is called clicked. And this is a action basically. And now we will go a little bit deeper on those actions and events in case you haven't met them in Unity yet. There will be a very short section, a very short reminder section, kind of to explain how this generally works in Unity. However, not a very deep one because we don't really have time for that. But if you know how to work with events and actions generally in Unity, you know that we can now subscribe something to this event. And we can say this will be our function that we will be writing in a second. We will say, let's call this function on button clicked. Now it's showing an error because this function does not exist yet. We have to write it. So let's do just that. Let's say void on button clicked. We don't need any parameters in this case. And now, again, I hope it's clear that now this means whenever we click the button, then this function will execute. And now this click property is not available on on all the controls, or actually I don't think on any other control. This is a special thing on the button that is kind of exposed, that is exposing what the button is actually doing. And it's kind of giving you this chance to subscribe to whenever you click the button. That way you don't have to do something more complicated with events like register an event listener or stuff like that. This is just a shortcut that UI Toolkit is providing us to access the functionality of the button. And trust me, we will do stuff like this, kind of registering events and adding new callbacks many times throughout the course. So if it's not really speaking of which, if it's not really clicking for you yet, you will have a couple of more opportunities to get into this. But for now, let's just focus on what we actually wanted to do. Now, what we wanted to do is to randomly resize our box whenever we press the button. So a very simple way how we can do that is, let's say we want a random int value. Let's say we don't want the thing to be 0, but we want the width to vary between 50 and 300 pixels. And now in order to actually set the width, we have to go box, style, width, and now we set the random width. And now this sort of syntax might be new to you. Essentially what we are doing here is we are doing exactly the stuff that we are doing in the inspector over in UI Builder. We can also do them by script. And that is the way how you would do that. So all the styling properties you can access with the box is also a visual element. So we are actually not, this is not button specific, but every visual element has this style property. You can see that in the IntelliSense visual element.style. And then you can access all sorts of things. Now with height, obviously, your colors, there are all sorts of things on this style property, and we will use a lot of them throughout the course. And so that's our script. If I didn't make any stupid mistakes, basically we should be able to try this out. Let's get our game object. And the only thing that's left to do is to find the script. We call this button screen. We add the script. And now let's press the play button. And voila, you can see it works. Our box is randomly being resized whenever we click the button. And so I think this is a good place to stop with our first control that we touched. Now, obviously, the button is not a super complicated control because it's basically intended to just do one thing when you click it. However, you saw that with those properties, and when you actually we will have a short look in the documentation later how you generally look at those controls. They are actually nicely designed such that they expose like the stuff that they want you to do with them. And in case of the button, it was this clicked action that we saw, which is basically the only thing where you can hook up some functionality to. And in that way, they're actually designed pretty nicely, such that when you look at them in the documentation or in your IntelliSense, in your code editor, you can pretty quickly understand what this control is actually meant for and how it's actually supposed to be used. Okay, so that's enough for the button. Next, in the next video, we are going to look at text elements and what we can do with them.